few months ago, I was plagued by a single question. What am I going to get them? I didn't have the money for anything grand, but simultaneously was adverse to anything cheap. As I tend to lean towards gifts with more depth, it's no surprise that I started to spend a lot of time surfing the internet, though it was more like aimlessly drifting if I'm to be honest. Hope appeared when my algorithm, actually being used for once, realised that I'm neurodivergent, and so began showing me art, crafts, plushies, and eventually crochet, in between of speed paints and 4-hour-long lore breakdown videos for games and movies that I've never even heard of, but I digress. And so my latest hyperfixation hit me like a truck. Now, I have tried crochet briefly before. A few years ago, though I can't remember exactly when. I read a book about it but didn't really understand. I remember scooping up the yarn and tying it. I think I just made squares and tied them together to vaguely get the shape I was going for. The attempts with fluffy yarn look better only because the fluff hides the frankly appalling crochet beneath it. This time I was determined, and after watching 2 beginner basics videos at 2 times speed, I was ready. I got this crochet thing down. From the 2nd of November to the 18th of December, I was there, crocheting. Any hour free was an hour spent hooking yarn. I laid in bed, the motion of single, double, half double stitches floating above me. My Google search was nothing but questions like, what is a magic circle? And what does SC20 CHH2DEC mean? After making flowers, animals, pouches, and Spider-Man, I had an idea. What if I made me? Well, not me, my Sona. Without further ado, let's get into it. For the base, I followed a tutorial on YouTube. All tutorials that I used will be linked in the description. It was really cold, so I just sat there in my room with a blanket and began crocheting. I kept messing up each limb, so it took at least 2 attempts to get right. After making the arms and a foot, I went and sat in the living room with my family, so have no footage of the rest of the body. Once the torso was done and the arms were attached, I decided to make a wire skeleton so that the doll would be posable. After putting it in and making sure it fit, I began to stuff the body. Then I made the neck.
Hello there.
On to the clothes. I bought 4 colours of yarn and spent some time thinking about what one would be best for what. I decided to use the white yarn first and use this blouse as reference. I tried to emulate the details by having the stitch pattern be vertical and even toyed with the idea of doing star stitches for the top part, but that seemed a little over my skill level. I started to plan some patterns with paper but gave up and went for improvising instead. Eventually I realised one crucial detail. If I made a shirt and then made a coat on top, the fabric would be really bulky. My best bet was to make the parts of the shirt that are visible under the coat, so the hour I spent making the panel was a waste. I'm so dumb. I thought the coat would be best made as symmetrical panels sewn together. I began by making 2 long parts that draped over the shoulder, and 2 shorter but wider parts which I folded into a cylinder and sewed to create the sleeves. The white ends were made separately and pushed inside and sewed to make it look like the sleeves of the shirt were poking through. I then pinned the panels and connected them. For this, I just threaded some black yarn through a large-eyed needle and stitched the 2 sides together. Since it's black, I didn't have to worry about hiding the stitch line since it blended well with the crochet. I also attached the sleeves. The next thing to do was crochet larger panels for the back. These ones I gave a slight slope on one side and then attached them so that they had the little V slit that my coat has. Grabbing the dark grey yarn, I began to make the first trouser leg. It was a little hard to figure out, but eventually I just made a square of double crochets with a notch in one of the corners where it will wrap around the waist. I crocheted the two legs together, then moved to refining the edge of the coat. I had to go back and forth a few times, and after that felt like the front was lacking, and so made 2 more panels in black yarn. I felt like attempting the real-life blouse pattern would be a fruitless endeavour, and so just made a collar and attached it to the square of the white that I made earlier. I folded the new panels of the coat to make triangles and sewed them flat. Once they were secure, I chose a button to sew at the front. Hair time! I learned from making the horse previously that hair in crochet is made by knotting bits of yarn together then pulling it through. I had such a hard time making the hair. At first I put a strand in every hole, but then it was too dense and using too much yarn. Then I tried every 2, every 4, in random holes and eventually made it look somewhat right. I pinned the cap of the head to the doll and gave her a much needed haircut. After all that, I made the decision to do it all again as I wanted her to be able to swap her from realistic hair to magical white hair. I sewed another cap and this time decided to try a method I saw someone else use, where they would wound yarn round a book before cutting it. I realised the hair looked too bulky and settled on only adding threads to certain areas and then flipping it over the bold ones. I pinned the hair to the head once more and plaited it to make sure it didn't get in the way. I actually liked the look of this hairstyle in doll form, so decided to leave it that way. I left the ends to trim later, but spoiler, I became afraid that I would mess it up, and so it's probably going to look like this forever. Similarly, the face was rather tricky and ultimately ended as just 2 black eyes. I watched a tutorial on crocheting triangles, but I just couldn't grasp it, and after a few failed attempts I made the mask out of squares, folding the corners where I needed a point. If you can guess the song she's dancing to, comment below.